Hello and welcome to this webinar on the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants in ordinary schools. My name is Ruth Thornton. I work as an intern for CSIE and I will be taking you through these materials over the next half hour or so. This webinar forms part of the Knowledge Box on disabled children's rights in education, one of 5 knowledge boxes created for learning and support assistance by the IMAS2 project, improving assistance in inclusive educational settings. This knowledge box has been prepared by CSIE, the Centre for Studies on Inclusive Education, a UK-based charity that works to promote equality and eliminate discrimination in education. This is the 4th and final part of this knowledge box. So far, we have established what disabled children's rights in education are. We have explored a rationale for inclusive education and have discussed practical tips and specific approaches and strategies which support inclusion for all. In this final webinar, we will be focusing on the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants in ordinary schools. In this webinar, we will first address matters of terminology and explain why we have chosen some of the words that we use, including the term learning and support assistants. We will then revisit Article 24 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and invite you to clarify what your thoughts are with regard to the kind of assistance needed so that disabled children can be effectively included in ordinary schools. Following this, we will present typical job descriptions and qualification requirements for learning and support assistants, and introduce a simple model for summarising their key roles and responsibilities. We will then explore a range of ways in which support may be offered and present a new model which puts forward 4 possible functions or actions of assistance to help us distinguish between different aspects of support. First of all, I would like to remind you that, as we have said in earlier parts of this knowledge box, we prefer to talk about disabled people and not people with disabilities, because this is what disabled people's organisations in the UK have recommended. As we said earlier, this makes it easier to emphasise that disability is understood as an experience rather than a person's attribute. Please remember that the only exception to this is when we refer to international instruments, such as the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which has adopted a different form of words, more widely used outside the UK. And now I'd like to say a few words about the term learning and support assistants. There are many different terms to refer to the adults who enable children's learning in schools. Those who are not teachers are often referred to as education assistants, teaching assistants, learning support assistants, or some similar term. All of these terms are used interchangeably, so language on this subject is far from uniform nationally or internationally. At the start of this project, we all thought long and hard about what form of words to adopt. Project partners considered a number of alternatives and eventually decided on the term learning and support assistants. This is because we wanted to recognise that these adults play a key role in helping disabled children to learn, but we wanted to make it clear that this goes beyond learning connected to curriculum subjects. For example, it may have to do with learning how to make friends and keep them. We also wanted to make it clear that these adults have an even wider contribution to make. for example, to offer support with children's individual care or hygiene needs, or to help ensure disabled children are treated with respect in school. Before we go any further, let us return to Article 24 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is what it says needs to happen. States parties shall ensure an inclusive education system at all levels. Disabled people receive the support required within the general education system to facilitate their effective education. You may remember from part 1 of this knowledge box that General Comment number 4, 2016, offers more details on how disabled children's right to inclusive education should be understood and implemented. This includes the following statements. Education should be directed to the development of the personality, talents, and creativity of the disabled people, as well as their mental, physical, and communicational abilities to their fullest potential. Assistance must be provided to ensure that they, disabled children, have effective access to education in a manner conducive to achieving their fullest possible social integration and individual development. So, assistants are called upon to support disabled children in mainstream schools so that they reach the fullest potential, the fullest possible individual potential. With this in mind, and also drawing from your own knowledge and experience, how do you think that learning and support assistance can provide this quality of service? What are the key things you would expect assistants to do in school to make sure children have such effective access to education? I will pause now for a few moments so that you can jot down your thoughts, which we will return to towards the end of the webinar. Thank you. When we think about the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants, it is important to remember that their presence in schools has significantly increased over the last 3 decades. Wayne Veck, a senior lecturer in education at the University of Winchester, writes that in 1997, around 60,000 learning and support assistants, as he also calls them, worked across nurseries, primary schools, secondary schools, special schools, and pupil referral units in England. More information on this is available in the resources section of this knowledge box. Latest figures from the Department of Education suggest that, as of 2016, the full-time equivalent of 265,100 265,167 teaching assistants were working in state-funded schools in England, which represents an increase of 28%. Despite this sharp increase in the deployment of learning and support assistants, qualification standards do not exist for the job at a European level, nor at a national level in many cases. For example, in the UK, the government does not require learning and support assistants to have a specific qualification. Instead, individual schools may determine the qualification level they ask for, although basic qualifications in English and Maths, GCSEs, are typically required. As a result, the qualifications of teaching and learning and support assistants vary considerably. Some assistants have no specific qualifications, but have plenty of experience working with children, whilst others have qualifications which range from vocational diplomas relating to education and childcare to degrees or even PhDs. However, according to the General Comment number 4 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the training and education of teachers and other support staff in the core values and competencies to accommodate inclusive learning environments is one of the central features of inclusive education. As well as arranging the qualifications of learning and support assistants, there is also no universally accepted definition or job description for the role, and even within some countries it varies. To help us form an overview of the role, we will now look at how 3 different UK-based sources present the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants. Firstly, Skills for Schools, a website providing information on careers, training and development for UK school support staff, created by the trade union Unison, states that teaching assistants support teachers and help children with their educational and social development, both in and out of the classroom. According to Skills for Schools, tasks of the learning and support assistants include getting the classroom ready for lessons, listening to children read, reading to them, or telling them stories, helping children who need extra support to complete tasks, helping teachers to plan learning activities and complete records, supporting teachers in managing class behaviour, supervising group activities, looking after children who are upset or have had accidents, clearing away materials and equipment after lessons, helping with outings and sports events, taking part in training, and carrying out administrative duties. Secondly, the UK government's National Careers Service website states that teaching assistants support teachers and help children with reading, writing, and learning activities. It then goes on to list the roles of learning and support assistants as help teachers prepare lesson materials and equipment, get the classroom ready for lessons and clear away afterwards, work with groups and individual pupils to make sure they understand their work and stay focused, watch, record and report pupils' progress to teachers, supervise group activities including outings and sports events, provide a safe and healthy environment and follow safeguarding procedures, help teachers manage classroom behaviour, look after children who are upset or unwell, lead classes with help from the teacher. Finally, TESS, the global digital education company, states that teaching assistants provide support to those children who need it most, as well as taking some of the burden from classroom teachers. While we would like to challenge the implication that disabled children are more of a burden on teachers than any other child can be, we acknowledge that providing personalised learning can be time-consuming and sometimes challenging. Test materials recognise that the type of role will vary across different schools and includes the following among the list of possible roles: providing one-to-one support for students who have education, health and care plans, doing intervention work, reading one-to-one with students, supporting the teacher in the classroom generally, supporting school trips, creating displays, running clubs, and supervising the playground area during break time. And finally, designing activities for students they support, but not planning whole lessons. According to Tess, assistants must also complete paperwork relating to student progress. All these job descriptions are very broad, and terms such as supporting or indeed helping can be misleading as to the assistant's actual role. In addition, such general descriptions of the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants can make it difficult to measure impact and adjust their deployment accordingly. We would also argue that it may not be helpful or even possible to attempt to describe a role which is so complex and multifaceted and which varies so much according to the school environment by reducing it to a simple list. It is therefore very important to agree as clear a description as possible of assistants' roles and responsibilities. Having a clear framework for understanding roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants can be helpful in planning, carrying out, and evaluating day-to-day work. It can also play a part in valuing the important contribution of the profession and redress some of the imbalances which are often apparent in assistants' terms of employment, such as level of pay, status in school, or career opportunities. The first IMAS project had put forward a number of recommendations which you can find in the resources section of this knowledge box. We propose the following model as a helpful way to understand the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants. We suggest that, first and foremost, assistants have an enabling role, aiming to promote independence as much as possible for the children they work with. It is important to establish this from the outset, because it often happens that assistants' willingness to help creates a pattern of dependency which allows children to rely on their assistants more than on their own resources or their friends. It may be helpful to be aware of this and guard against it. Beyond this, we suggest that learning and support assistants' actions or tasks fall into two broad categories: supporting learning on the one hand and supporting well-being on the other. And to complete this model, we suggest that supporting learning covers curriculum-based learning as well as children's social and emotional development. And supporting well-being has to do with enabling advocacy and inclusion, as well as responding to personal support needs. Let us now explore each part of this framework in a bit more detail. We are dealing with promoting independence first because we suggest this should be the underlying principle at the heart of everything a learning and support assistant does. Article 24, paragraph 2d stipulates, disabled people receive the support required to facilitate their effective education. As such, the emphasis of all support, including learning and support assistance, is clearly on facilitation. This is why we say that assistants have an enabling role, first and foremost. Many learning and support assistants often work with disabled students on a one-to-one basis. This support may well be provided with the intention of facilitating the disabled child's access to learning. However, consistently using this form of assistance can be counterproductive. It can foster in the disabled student a dependence on their assistance, or it may get in the way of the disabled child forming social connections. This message has been made clearly by Diana Di Gennaro, researcher at the University of Salerno, in Italy. She has said that when a child regularly works with a learning supporter on their own, separately from other children, this can create the phenomenon of micro-exclusion. And this, she concludes, is not inclusion. A short video clip of her making this statement is available in the resources section of this knowledge box. All Means All, the Australian Alliance for Inclusive Education, has on its website a helpful toolkit for educators with an interesting section on the role of education assistants, as it calls them. It states, the greater the space able to be afforded, the greater likelihood of a healthy and robust teacher-student instructional relationship, social interaction and current connection with student peers, and the educational assistant developing an assistive and interactive relationship with the broader class. A link to this website is available in the resources section of this knowledge box. Further, international research has demonstrated a negative effect on academic and social development of students when assistants are too closely attached to them. Here are 3 examples based on information from the All Means All website. If the assistant's support focuses too much on the completion of tasks, with the assistant stepping in at every stage of a given task, this may prevent the student from constructing their own identity as an independent learner. This, in turn, may lead to an unhelpful dependence on others. It can also remove the real worth of any participation if the assistant takes a leading role in the work. For example, if an assistant working with a child always repeats for them the teacher's instructions to the whole class, this child will learn that they do not need to pay attention when the teacher speaks to the whole class. Or if an assistant automatically adds inappropriate punctuation for a disabled child when acting as their scribe, the work becomes less the product of the child and more that of their assistant. It also deprives the child of an important opportunity to learn how to use punctuation. The completion and quality of work must always remain the responsibility of the student. Learned helplessness can occur when an assistant is too attentive. By being overly attentive, assistants can teach disabled students to rely on them. As a result, the children miss out on valuable learning opportunities because they know if they do not complete a task or answer a given question, there is always someone there to help, if not do much of the work for them. Some children may also respond to an overly attentive assistant by exhibiting challenging behaviour. If the learning and support assistant is too closely attached to the disabled child, this is likely to inhibit the child from forming a good teacher-student relationship and good peer relationships. The constant presence of a learning and support assistant with the disabled child can easily send an exclusionary message that the student belongs with the learning and support assistant to the other children. Other children may also conclude that the disabled child still needs to be mothered. To conclude this section, it is important to remember that no matter how much support a child seems to need during the course of the school day, the ultimate goal of education is to prepare children for adult life. Disabled children are no exception, and, as general comment number 4 reminds us, their educators are called upon to best prepare students for independent living and vocational contexts. We mentioned earlier that it may not be appropriate to describe a role which is so complex and multifaceted by reducing it to a simple list of tasks. For a start, what often makes a difference is not so much what an adult does, but the way in which they do it. The way in which an adult says, "Good morning," or asks, "How are you?" can have a major impact on how valued a child feels, on the quality of the interaction between the child and the assistant, on the extent to which the child engages with the learning tasks, and ultimately on the learning outcomes. So instead of putting forward a list of tasks, we are proposing a framework for understanding the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants in mainstream schools. This framework summarises the broad areas of learning and support assistants' work. In other words, what they do. We have already mentioned that apart from the overarching aim of promoting independence, there are two main areas in which the work of assistants falls: that of supporting well-being and that of supporting learning. First, we turn our attention to supporting well-being. There are two elements to this part of learning and support assistants' role. On the one hand, this is about enabling advocacy and inclusion, and on the other, it is about attending to personal support needs. Let us explore these one at a time. Learning and support assistants can easily become a strong ally of the children they are working with, if not a powerful advocate for them. This means that they may sometimes work with other children or adults in school to achieve outcomes which will be of direct benefit to a disabled child. One such example would be to monitor other children's behaviour and, if necessary, plan in collaboration with other adults an intervention which helps other children learn to value diversity and equality and promote respect for disabled children in school. In this way, learning and support assistants can play a key role in developing or strengthening a culture of equality and respect for disabled people in school. Much more than this, assistants can encourage and support disabled children to become strong self-advocates and to encourage and support other children to act as disabled children's allies. The second aspect of supporting well-being is attending to personal support needs. Some children may be under the care and support of a number of professionals, including, for example, a physiotherapist or a speech and language therapist. A pattern which works well for these professionals to visit the child in school and work in collaboration with the learning and support assistant. And the therapist may recommend a particular intervention, which the assistant can incorporate with any other work they are doing with the child. For example, a tailor-made physiotherapy session can be built into a program of activities for the child during PE time, so that the child can benefit from a personalised curriculum without needing to be separated from their peers. There may also be health needs which the assistant may attend to. Some children may need to be tube-fed during the school day, which some schools may see as a challenge, while others may take in their stride. At Emerson's Green Primary School, near Bristol, tube feeding is seen as an ordinary part of life, which does not stop children from being fully engaged in school activities. Learning and support assistants, trained by a specialist feeding nurse, carry out tube feeding in class or wherever the child may be, for example, in assembly or on a school trip, ensuring children continue to be fully included in all aspects of school life. A short video about the school, including interviews with parents, teachers and assistants, is available in the resources section of this knowledge box. Next, we turn our attention to supporting learning. When talking about what children learn in school, perhaps the most obvious kind of learning is that which involves gaining insights and knowledge relevant to specific curriculum subjects, such as maths, science, history, or geography. Support for this type of learning can take many forms, for example, breaking things down into small steps to help scaffold a child's learning, or developing new resources based on a child's strengths and interests to make the learning process more interesting and engaging, and to make the subject matter more meaningful and relevant to the child. More practical suggestions for supporting children's learning and development were offered in part 3 of this knowledge box. Having said that, children learn in school much more than what is on the curriculum and which teachers teach during structured learning times. At the very least, children also learn from their experiences of interacting with adults or with peers, and from observing how other children behave and what happens as a result. So they learn about following rules or what happens when rules are broken. They learn how to play or work alone or with their peers, how to negotiate and collaborate with others. In short, they learn how to be with one another. School plays an important part in children learning how to be a 5-year-old, for example, or a 15-year-old. Children also pick up messages about how others see them, and this usually feeds into how they see themselves and their evolving sense of self. Most children learn all of these things, which are sometimes called the hidden curriculum, intuitively. Other children find it harder to pick up such things on their own and may need help to learn from their experiences in school. This might have to do with helping children learn how to develop and maintain friendships, or with helping them to understand their emotions and how to deal with them, manage them. This is why we suggest that when we consider the role of learning and support assistants to support learning, we have to remember that this covers learning related to curriculum subjects as well as other types of learning, more closely connected to their sense of self and to their social and emotional development. We will now move on to discuss how learning and support assistants can support for well-being and support for learning. Having established the main areas of learning and support assistants' role, in the next part of this webinar, we will explore some ways in which support may be offered. Each of us may have our own understanding of what support involves, but its meaning is rather vague and its impact not easy to capture or measure. Perhaps if we could establish a language of learning support, it may become easier to define its outcomes and measure its impact. We would like to share with you such a language or framework. At this point, we would like to introduce you to the 4 functions of learning support, a framework for the deployment of teaching assistants' time. It has been created by Judith Carter, a UK-based educational psychologist and founder of Willow Tree Learning, an independent school improvement service. We find this a helpful model for distinguishing between different aspects of support and hope you will find it helpful too. When an adult is working to support a child's learning, the kind of support offered will depend on a number of factors, including where the child is on their learning journey with regard to a particular topic or issue that they are learning about. This new model puts forward 4 possible functions of assistance. These can be used to clarify the specific purpose of assistance time when working with a child and as a way of evaluating the impact of this work. The 4 functions of learning support are mediation, reinforcement, assessment, and intervention. We offer a brief description of each one here, and you can see them in the roots of the tree on the diagram on the screen. More information about this framework can be found in the resources section of this knowledge box. Mediation. Mediation in this context means to facilitate access to something. Learning and support assistants can mediate between a disabled learner and their school experience. This can occur both inside and outside of the classroom. For example, when the class teacher is addressing the whole class, an assistant may be sitting close to the child, reminding them to look at the teacher or the board or to pay attention to what the teacher is saying. You may remember an example we mentioned earlier, in which we said that it would be counterproductive if the assistant always repeated the teacher's instructions for the benefit of a particular child, because they could give rise to learnt helplessness. In this example, mediation is used to support learning relevant to social skills, learning how to learn. Reinforcement. Learning and support assistants can reinforce a skill or learning behaviour. This reinforcement might consist of rehearsing a specific skill with a learner, perhaps in order to strengthen what has already been learnt, before moving on to something more challenging. For example, a learning and support assistant and a child, or a group of children, may go over a particular maths concept as a reminder of what has already been learnt, and in order to strengthen that knowledge before introducing a new and more challenging concept. It is important to remember that a good way to revise and strengthen what has been learnt is to explain it to somebody else. Asking a child to explain to a friend what they have learnt can be of much learning value to both children involved. In this example, reinforcement is used to support learning relevant to curriculum subjects. Assessment. Learning and support assistants can complete tasks, tests, or observations of children as part of the teacher's ongoing assessment of the child's needs and progress. For example, the learning and support assistant could observe a child's interaction with peers during break time and take notes, which they later discuss with the child's teacher. Between them, and in consultation with the child and their parents, if relevant, they could reach a collective judgment about the child's well-being and/or their social and emotional development, and may decide on a plan of action to help ensure the child is better included by their peers. For example, in this example, assessment is used to support well-being, which may feed into supporting learning in relation to social and emotional development, or to supporting well-being in relation to enabling advocacy and inclusion. Intervention. Learning and support assistants can also perform targeted intervention with a particular child or with a group of children to help them learn a new skill. The programme of targeted interventions could be part of a programme designed by an external agency or by the school's special needs coordinator. For example, a learning and support assistant could perform a targeted intervention designed by an occupational therapist to help a child learn to wash their hands well. Another targeted intervention may be designed by the school's SENCO to help a child learn to tell the time, or to compare the weight of two objects and determine which is heavier or lighter. In this first example, intervention is used to offer support for well-being with regard to personal support needs and personal hygiene in particular. In the second example, intervention is used to offer support for learning in relation to curriculum subjects. Now that we have discussed the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants, let us take a moment to step back and reflect on this webinar. I would now like to ask you, Has your opinion of the roles and responsibilities of learning and support assistants changed in any way since the start of this webinar? If so, in what way or ways? If your opinion has changed, or even if it has not, why do you think this is the case? Please refer back to your notes that you made at the beginning of this webinar, and if you would like to, make any adjustments so that they better reflect your present thinking, please do so. I shall pause here for a few moments to allow you to reflect. So, as this webinar comes to an end, let us also take a moment to review the material we have covered. We firstly discussed the use of the term learning and support assistants and considered how these adults can be instrumental in putting into practice the requirements of Article 24 on inclusive education. Then we looked at some examples of job descriptions for a learning and support assistant and discussed why it is important to establish a clear framework for understanding their roles and responsibilities. We then proposed such a framework. With promoting independence as the overarching aim, permeating everything assistants do, we suggested that their contribution falls into two broad categories: supporting well-being and supporting learning. And then we broke down this further to make it clear that supporting well-being has to do with enabling advocacy and inclusion, as well as responding to personal support needs. And supporting learning covers curriculum-based learning, as well as children's social and emotional development. Next, we discussed a number of different forms which support can take, using Judith Carter's 4 functions of learning support as a model. The 4 functions in this model are mediation, reinforcement, assessment, and intervention. We presented each of these in turn and gave some examples of how each of them may look in practice. This brings us to the end of the webinar. Please make time to watch the videos and explore the websites and documents listed in the resources section of this knowledge box. We hope you have found this useful. Thank you for your time.